That morning, inside the brightly lit showroom in Fort Worth, my son-in-law slapped my shoulder and laughed loudly in front of the crowd. Buy my wife a car if you still want to keep a little dignity. The whole room burst out laughing. Camera flashes went off nonstop, while I just stood silently, my hand resting on the pen. They thought I was a washed-up old man. But what they didn't know was that the $210,000 Tesla never belonged to him. And today I didn't come to give a car. I came to take back my dignity. If you've ever been looked down upon by your own family, ever chosen silence over shouting to keep your pride, leave a single dot in the comments and hit subscribe so you don't miss the true stories where justice doesn't need to scream, but everyone can hear it. Thank you for being here with me. I never thought that after 40 years of building my career, the day I'd be humiliated would happen in such a glamorous place, in a gleaming showroom filled with the scent of new leather, cold metal reflections, pop music echoing, and well-dressed faces sipping free cappuccinos. That day in Fort Worth, the sun blazed so harshly that the road reflected dazzling light, making the glass wall of Sterling Motors shine like a mirror. I only meant to stop by to look at a few Tesla Model S Plaid for fun, because people said it was a machine that runs on faith instead of gas. But Brandon, my son-in-law, had other plans. He walked out from the lounge area, wearing a white suit, a gold watch, and the smug face of a man who believed the whole world revolved around him. Beside him was Rachel, my daughter, wearing a cream silk dress, her eyes filled with a quiet fear, like someone who knew this morning would end with a scar that would never heal. Dad, Brandon said loud enough for everyone to hear. Today marks 8 years of our marriage. Everyone knows you promised us a memorable gift, right? I nodded lightly. Right, but I didn't think that gift needed 4 wheels, $210,000, and a salesman as a witness. Laughter broke out among the staff. Brandon smiled, stepped closer, and whispered just loud enough for me to hear. So what do you want them to think? Is a former businessman who once ran a multi-million-dollar company too stingy to buy his daughter an electric car? That line hit like a cold punch. I saw Rachel gently pull his sleeve, but Brandon brushed her off, raising the contract under the showroom lights. You just need to sign. The car will be registered under your old company, Drummond Agritech. We'll pay it back later. I looked at the bold print. Drummond Agritech LLC, a name that once symbolized my sweat and blood, now used as a prop in his display of power. You know that company's no longer active, I said slowly. Brandon shrugged with a half smile, but its account is still open and the bank still lists you as the owner. Just one signature if you still want to keep a little dignity. The whole showroom turned its gaze toward us. A young salesman forced a smile, handing me a pen with a trembling hand. I could hear the pen drop on the glass table, the music shifting beats, the click of heels against the floor. Every sound blurred except for the sound of my own breathing. I signed, clean stroke, no hesitation. Brandon immediately snatched the paper, held it high like a trophy, and said loudly for all to hear, "Thank you, Dad. Now you're officially broke." Scattered laughter followed. Rachel bowed her head, her lips trembling. I folded the paper, returned it to the clerk, and said nothing. Not because I was afraid, but because in that moment I knew everything had just begun. The reflection from the computer screen caught my eye, and I noticed a line at the bottom corner. Registered owner, Drummond Agritech LLC. Authorized signatory, Caleb Drummond. I read it again and again, then looked at Brandon, still laughing with his friends about the Tesla his father-in-law paid for. He didn't know that in his proudest moment he had just tied himself to a legal thread I had woven long ago. I smiled, quietly walking out of the showroom amid applause and echoing footsteps on the tile. They thought I had sold my dignity, but in truth I had just signed the opening line of a lesson they would never forget, and that lesson carried an old name whose ink had never faded, Drummond. That afternoon, when I left Sterling Motors, I didn't drive straight home. I took the bridge over the Trinity River and stopped in front of an old green-painted garage on the edge of South Austin. The wooden sign was faded. Drummond Agritech, Engine and Field Systems. The Texas wind carried the scent of dry grass and engine oil hidden beneath the afternoon sun, pulling me back 30 years to the day I placed a pine desk beside a stack of combine repair manuals and scribbled a 5-year roadmap on the wall for a company that didn't yet have a name. Back then, Rachel was 12, sitting on a wooden crate on weekends, legs swinging as she read National Geographic, occasionally looking up to ask questions people would call random, but I knew they were the nails that anchored memory. "Dad, why does the combine roar before it runs smoothly?" I said, "Because everything needs to be properly aligned. The roar is just a reminder that something's still off." I lived by that simple philosophy. I worked day and night, from replacing bearings in an '88 John Deere combine to designing air mixers for drought-resistant pumps. Every invoice was hand-signed with a blue Pilot pen, every delivery labeled with paper tape, marked with date, time, and recipient. In the 5th year, I earned enough to buy my first CNC lathe. In the 8th, I hired 2 young engineers. By the 12th, Drummond Agritech began appearing in the Agricultural Contractors Handbook of Central Texas as a lifesaver during drought season. I still keep invoice number 000001 tucked inside a plastic binder next to my first business license. Every line dated, every batch numbered, every signature clear. Back then, Sterling Motors didn't sell electric cars. They were my client for compressors and cooling fans used in their maintenance wing. I remember their contact then was Darren Cho, a young technician who liked to ask questions. He's now the showroom manager. The company grew. For 3 consecutive years, revenue hit numbers I once thought belonged only in dreams. The bank opened a business credit line, and my accountant suggested converting from a sole proprietorship to an LLC to protect assets. I did everything by the book. The operating agreement listed ownership, 51% under my name, 49% reserved for future employee incentives. Signatory rights remained with me, with secondary authorization to the CFO per board resolution. Not a single word in those papers was random. They were the load-bearing walls of a legal house I knew would one day be the only thing still standing. Then Brandon entered Rachel's life. I remember the first night he came to dinner, bringing a bottle of wine and 3 jokes. He knew how to blend into a room. He talked about markets, modern cash flow management, and how the new age belongs to leverage. I listened quietly. People who talk too much about leverage often forget that the fulcrum is what matters most. In 2021, when tax season came, Brandon accidentally turned that leverage into a hole. His accountant botched the deduction filings, converting deferred taxes into back taxes. The IRS sent him an invitation for a friendly review. Brandon panicked. Rachel cried. "I've never liked men who talk like saints, but hide behind their wives when the wind changes." Still, I immediately transferred $120,000 from the company account, note, loan, emergency tax shortfall, 18 months, 0% interest, to bail him out. I demanded a promissory note, a repayment schedule, and proof of transfer images for each installment. Brandon nodded, signed eagerly, saying, "I'll never forget this." Less than a year later, he demanded full control of Agritech. That meeting had only 3 people: me, Brandon, and the young accountant who had just joined. Brandon came with an expansion plan, projecting slides like he was pitching to an investment board. He talked about capital strategy, financial leverage, an IPO in 3 years, and ended with, "I want full executive control. You just need to sign a permanent authorization." I didn't answer immediately. I opened a drawer, pulled out the operating agreement, and slowly turned to page 6, Ownership and Control. I slid the paper toward him and pointed to the bold line, "Majority ownership, Caleb Drummond, 51%. I tapped my pen against that number, steady, deliberate, like small hammer strikes on old wood. You want to run it? Go ahead, I said quietly. But the charter is the charter. Everything you build after this still stands on that frame. If you don't respect it, you're just building castles on sand. Brandon smirked, tilting his head slightly. You really think legal wording can hold back the times? I looked straight into his eyes and replied softly, No, the law doesn't hold back the times. The law holds people. And that's why I wrote it. The air thickened. The accountant bowed her head, typing on the calculator with shaking hands. Brandon shut his laptop without another word. I stacked the papers, slid them back into their folder, and said gently before leaving, Don't mistake silence for weakness. Sometimes silence is the only way the law can hear your voice. From then on, meetings began without me. Parties on expense sheets, presentations full of words like breakthrough, dominate, disrupt. Quietly, I requested the accountant to mail quarterly cash flow reports to my private P.O. box. Quietly, I saved them all to a USB labeled AGT Q1Q4, sealed them in a moisture-proof bag, and locked it in the drawer. The old garage had become a small office with metal file cabinets. That afternoon, after leaving Sterling Motors, I pulled open the second drawer, pressed my hand on a stack of binders labeled Agritech Core Docs. The smell of old paper spread out like the scent of time that had been sealed. I sat down and opened the operating agreement. The notary seal was still sharp. Section 6.2, Control and Signatory. The majority owner, Caleb Drummond, retains final control over assets, major transactions, and the registration of assets under the company's name. Short, cold, precise. I closed the cover and set it on the desk. Following the client list, I pulled out the Sterling Motors service and parts file. Purchase order number SM2147 2149 2153. The fan and compressor orders from 8 to 10 years ago, with the receiving signature being Darren Cho. At the top right of each order, my signature C. Drummond was still blue, the pen stroke even like a strong weld line. I smiled very slightly. The linkage isn't noisy, but it exists, and it speaks when needed. I opened the business account through the First Lone Star Bank app and scrolled back to signatory privileges. My name was still at the top of the list. The sub-accounts had spending authority, but could not register assets without approval from the majority owner. Each line of terms and conditions was like a screws I had tightened into a steel frame years ago. Now it was just a matter of putting on the roof. I poured a glass of water, leaned back, and let the anger settle like iron filings falling after grinding. At Sterling Motors, Brandon said I was officially broke. He only saw the surface, the signing pen, the printed paper, the crowd smiles. He didn't see the legal infrastructure I had laid down layer by layer, the operating agreement, the business license, the asset registration authority, and Texas corporate law. He didn't know Sterling Motors used to be an old client. Darren might not owe me any favor, but the system owes me consistency. I packed everything into the evidence box. Operating agreement, original notarized copy, label OA original. Board resolution, signatory and asset registration, label BR signatory. The most recent quarterly bank report, label AGT Bank Quarter 3. Sterling Motors file, purchase orders and receipts, label SM Pack. A USB containing the scanned files, placed in a zip pouch, sealed with a stamp. I wrote a short memo sheet, 4 lines in black ink, printed in italics. Drummond plan, no arguing, no pleading, only activate existing mechanisms. Respect procedure, let justice flow on its own. The sun dropped behind the metal roof, casting an orange stripe on the wall. Rachel texted a terse apology, then immediately recalled it as if she herself feared her words would leave a mark. I felt more pity than anger. Some people aren't bad. They're just weak before the one who speaks loudest. I picked up the phone. The contact still had the name Tessa Morales, the corporate attorney who helped me draft the operating agreement 15 years ago. Tessa is someone who doesn't speak in flourishes. She says what needs to be said and writes what needs to be written. We lost touch because I thought I no longer needed the law. This afternoon, I relearned an old lesson. Law is like engine oil. When things are running smoothly, few notice it. When it's dry, everything starts grinding against itself. I pressed call. On the second ring, she picked up, her voice calm as always. "This is Tessa. Is that you, Uncle Caleb?" I looked at the sealed evidence box, looked at the 4-line memo sheet, and then said, "Yes, it's me. Tessa, we need to reopen an old file. Its name is Drummond." On the other end, I heard the click of a pen cap. "I'm listening, Uncle. Tell me each timeline marker." I took a deep breath and began to read slowly. The formation date, the 51% clause, signatory authorization, Sterling Motors being a former client, and this afternoon the sentence, "Now you're officially broke." "Okay," Tessa said, her voice emotionless but forceful. "We won't sue first. We'll simply ask the system to tell the truth." I nodded, though I knew she couldn't see it. "Good. I choose silence. But this time, silence is procedure." I hung up. The Austin night slid across the window frame, quiet, its sword being precise. I turned off the lights, and before leaving the room, I looked back at the wooden board hanging on the wall. The line I carved decades ago, which still reads like a command. A line before, accelerating. Tomorrow I will align, then I will let the system accelerate for me. And when that happens, the roar will no longer be humiliation, but a sign that the engine of justice has fired in the proper phase. I opened my phone once more and drafted an email to Tessa Morales with the subject, "Drummond, Ownership and Asset Registration Review." Attached were the scans of the operating agreement, the board resolution, the bank report, and the Sterling Motors purchase orders. I pressed send, watched the word sent appear, then locked the evidence box and added one more seal just to be sure. Late at night, Tessa replied with one line. "Tomorrow at 9:00 a.m., my office on Congress. Av, bring the originals. We begin." The next morning I arrived at Tessa Morales' office on Congress Avenue. 12th floor, thick glass doors, sunlight highlighting the walnut grain on the desk, the smell of Arabica coffee mixed with freshly printed paper, the scent of justice being rearranged. Tessa looked at me, her eyes sharp yet calm. She opened her laptop and typed a few quick commands. "I've checked the registry," she said in a voice as steady as if reading a verdict. "Brandon has never transferred ownership of the company. The car is registered under Drummond Agritech, LLC, and the company, according to the state of Texas system, still belongs to you." I didn't answer. I just took a deep breath, hearing my heartbeat 3 times. Each thump a piece of faith returned. Tessa slid a printout toward me. "Registered owner, Caleb Drummond. 51%. Status, active," she continued. "If you allow, I'll draft legal representation papers to preserve and activate your corporate ownership rights. When needed, we can petition the court to confirm retrieval authority." I nodded. "Do it. But Tessa, I don't want to sue. I want the truth to reveal itself. I want him to pull the curtain down on his own." She smiled faintly, the kind of smile from someone who's seen too many disputes end without a gavel strike. "Then we'll call it Plan Drummond." I watched her jot the phrase into her notebook with a brown ink pen. The name sounded simple, but I knew it would be the rail line for the justice train about to move. We started preparing. Tessa contacted the Texas Business Registry to request an electronic ownership verification. She submitted notarized copies of the operating agreement and board resolution, along with her law license. I, meanwhile, returned to First Lone Star Bank, where I had opened the Agritech account nearly 20 years ago. The branch was still in the same place, the corner of Riverside. I met Kellen Hayes, the branch manager who once shook my hand when I signed my first compressor project loan. He looked at me through thin glasses. I heard about the car. You're here to confirm corporate account authority? Yes, I said, and to print all transactions from the past. 6 months, including transfers from Brandon Sterling's sub-account. He nodded, asking no questions. He knew my kind, not looking for trouble, but not letting anyone step on me. 2 hours later, I held a file nearly 200 pages thick, sealed in a red cover embossed, confidential client copy. I opened the first page. Transaction Tipper 78324. Payment to Sterling Motors, $210,000. Source, Drummond Agritech, LLC. I pressed my lips together and reread the description. Vehicle purchase, Tesla Model S Plaid. I needed nothing more. One signature of mine on the operating agreement was enough to turn that transaction around. That evening, I sat in my small office, yellow light reflecting on the old wooden sign. I picked up my metal pen and wrote on a new sheet. Plan Drummond. 3 principles. 1. No reaction to words, only by evidence. 2. No attack, only activation of existing rights. 3. Let the offender build the stage on which he'll be unmasked. Tessa called while I was sealing the file. I just received an email from Sterling Motors, she said. They're announcing the delivery ceremony for the Tesla Model S Plaid next Saturday. Guests include local press and business council members from Fort Worth. Brandon is listed as the host. I paused a moment. Saturday. The same showroom. The crowd. The lights. Tessa asked, "Will you attend?" I answered slowly, "Yes, but not to see the car. To see how far he'll perform before the lights change direction." I hung up, poured a cup of tea, and looked out the window. Over Austin's night sky, thin clouds covered the moon like dust over truth. One gust of wind, and everything would be exposed. Cliffhanger. I opened my laptop and typed a calendar entry. Saturday, 10 o'clock a.m. Sterling Motors, Fort Worth. Ceremony. I pressed enter and closed the lid. In the dark, the only light left was from the sealed evidence box, the small glow of an old signature waiting to be read aloud before the public. 2 days before the delivery ceremony, Brandon texted the whole family, inviting us to dinner in Dallas, saying it was a small celebration for a new beginning. The words "new beginning" made me chuckle softly. He wasn't lying. He just didn't know that beginning would end his own dream. The restaurant was on the 20th floor of a riverside hotel along the Trinity, where businessmen like to show off through lights more than through words. I arrived 10 minutes early. Soft jazz played. Red wine glasses reflected the lights like diluted blood. I sat down at the table where Rachel was already waiting, her face carrying the exhaustion of someone living between two worlds. "Dad, thank you for coming," Rachel said quietly. "Of course," I replied. "It's a family dinner. How could I miss it?" Brandon came in last, his expensive cologne and laughter arriving before his silhouette. He brought 2 friends from the investment circle, Mark Hensley and Trent Dawson, both in black suits with bright ties, looking more ready for a deal signing than a meal. Brandon patted my shoulder, excited. "Dad, you finally made it. Tomorrow's the big day. Tesla Model S Plaid, $210,000, paid in full by the family. I don't think this could have happened without you." I lifted my glass of water and looked at him a second longer than usual. "Is that so?" I said calmly. "I'm just curious. What company name is on the registration?" Brandon hesitated slightly, then sneered. "Why get into details? For now, it's Drummond Agritech, but soon it'll change to Sterling Investments. Soon." He emphasized the last word, his tone full of meaning. The whole table laughed as if he had just told a brilliant joke. Rachel stayed silent, her eyes down, fingers turning the wine glass she never drank from. I knew her heart was torn between guilt and fear. Some fractures in a marriage don't make a sound. They just bleed, slowly. I said nothing more. I smiled and quietly opened my phone under the table. Tessa had texted, "All documents sealed and notarized." I typed back 3 words. "Perfect. Wait for the show." Throughout dinner, Brandon talked endlessly about investment plans, about expanding Sterling Investments into a small corporation for agricultural equipment leasing. Listening to him made me feel a bit sorry. He had talent, but lacked the one thing that mattered: humility. When dessert came, he pulled out his phone and turned on live stream mode. The screen light reflected on his self-satisfied face. "Hey everyone, listen up," he said, excited. "Tomorrow, my old man's cutting the ribbon for his son-in-law's first Tesla at Sterling Motors. Fort Worth. 10 o'clock sharp. If you're nearby, come see it. It's a family event, but also a classy one." I kept smiling as his friends clapped him on the back, cheering, their glasses clinking brightly. The whole restaurant turned to look, maybe thinking he was a young entrepreneur celebrating a milestone. Only I knew those flashes didn't just capture joy. They recorded evidence of arrogance. Rachel touched my hand gently, her voice trembling. "Dad, please don't be angry with him," I replied softly. "No, I'm not angry. I'm just, waiting for the right moment." A breeze from the window lifted the light gray curtain, brushing against my arm. It was cold but clear, a reminder that silence isn't surrender. It's stepping back to take better aim. I stood up early, placing the prepaid check in front of Brandon. "Tonight's dinner is on me. Tomorrow the stage is yours. Perform it well?" As I walked out of the restaurant, Brandon's proud voice echoed behind me. "Tomorrow, the old man's cutting the ribbon for me." I paused for half a second, not turning back. In that moment, I knew. The show had truly begun. The night before the car handover ceremony, light rain fell over Austin. The drops tapped evenly on the tin roof of the old workshop, sounding like a countdown clock, each beat sharp and cold. I sat alone in the office, the yellow desk lamp glowing over the paperwork. The words on the first page standing out: Plan Drummond. Final phase. Around 10 o'clock, my phone buzzed. Tessa called, her voice calm but firm. "I just got word. Brandon's trying to access the company's bank files. Someone said he got help from someone who used to work for you." I straightened up. "Who?" A brief silence, then she said, "Rick Salazar, your former accountant." I closed my phone and took a long breath. That name carried the scent of old paper, ink, and the memories of years spent hunched over a desk. Rick had been like a son to me, managing all the ledgers, signatures, and payrolls. I'd helped him study further, start his own office. Now he was selling the very name I once protected, just for a few dollars from Brandon. I grabbed my coat and drove through the rain to South Lamar, where Rick rented a small accounting office. The lights were still on. Through the glass, I saw him standing by the printer, bending over to sign something. I pushed the door open. "Mr. Caleb?" he stammered, quickly covering the paper with his hand. I walked closer and saw the First Lone Star Bank logo on the header, the title, Statement Request, Signatory Update. At the bottom, a blank line read, Signature C. Drummond. I smiled faintly. "Working late, I see." Rick stammered. "It's not what you think. Brandon just asked me to check some statements, to see if there were any errors." I stepped closer, the light reflecting off the desk. "Errors? Brandon asked you to alter the statement that lists a $210,000 transfer, payment to Sterling Motors, Tesla Model S Plaid. He wants you to delete that line and replace it with Sterling Investments payment, making the car his personal asset instead of the company's. You know, one small edit changes the entire legal responsibility. But you forgot. Every genuine statement has already been archived in my backup system. If you send a fake, one click will show the hash mismatch at the bank. And when that happens, it won't be him facing the charge. It'll be you." The room went silent. The rain outside grew heavier. Rick looked at me, then at the paper. His hands trembled, his eyes darting around the room. The same room where a photo still hung of us from Agritech's opening day in 2011. "You know I owe you," he whispered. But Brandon said all he needed was a signature copy. He promised me 10,000. I thought no one would find out. I nodded slowly. I know, Rick. I know everything. But remember, justice doesn't need noise to be heard. It only needs the truth. I sat down, opened my briefcase, and placed a USB on the desk. Here's the original data. If you want to save yourself, keep it intact and send me the real file. Just one email. I'll pretend tonight never happened. Rick stood still for a few seconds, then tore the statement request sheet in half. His voice trembled. "You don't know how much I hate myself for this. I became an accountant because I believed in numbers, and now $10,000 haunts me." I didn't reply. I just slid Tessa Morales' business card across the desk. "If you have any integrity left, send her the real file in the morning. She'll know what to do." As I walked out, he called after me, "Mr. Caleb, I'll do it. I promise." I turned back once. "Good. Keep that last promise, Rick." The rain had eased. I stood under the awning watching the last drops fall to the pavement, small but enough to wet the whole night. At 1 a.m, a new email appeared in my inbox. Sender, Rick Salazar. Subject, True Financial File for Justice. Attachment, Drummond Agritech, Bank Statements. Real.pdf. Below it, he wrote one line, "I've kept the true file. Thank you for not yelling at me." I forwarded the email to Tessa with a note. "Cross-check Sterling Motors transaction. Need verification." 10 minutes later, my phone lit up with her reply. Brandon transferred $210,000 from the company account to pay for the car. Confirmed through the bank system. This is criminal evidence. I knew how he managed it. Back in 2021, I had granted him an authorization limit of $250,000 to handle corporate payments, an act of trust between father and son-in-law. Now he had used that same authority to bind himself to the charge. Misuse of corporate assets. I stared at the figure, $210,000, stark in the dark, precise and cold as a scalpel. Everything had come full circle. The crime, the evidence, the witness, all waiting for daylight to reveal themselves under the lights. I turned off the lamp and closed the workshop door. In the darkness, I heard the last raindrop hit the ground, soft, but enough to mark the end of betrayal and the start of justice. On my phone screen, a Sterling Motors notification glowed. 10 a.m. Ceremony confirmed. I looked at the line and smiled faintly. Tomorrow, he'd stand under the lights, in front of cameras, convinced he had won, and I, just one signature away from letting him pull the curtain down on himself. Saturday morning, Fort Worth blazed with sunlight. The pale blue sky reflected off the curved glass facade of the Sterling Motors showroom, where dozens of guests, reporters, and TV cameras had gathered for the honorary vehicle handover. Red ribbons wrapped around the gleaming Tesla Model S Plaid, polished as if with sunlight itself. I walked inside, holding my cane, wearing a simple gray vest. The crowd turned to look. Brandon's voice rang out through the speakers. "Good morning, everyone. Today is special. The day I receive a gift celebrating 8 years of marriage. And the man who gave it to me is the one who taught me everything about business. My father-in-law, Mr. Caleb Drummond." Applause filled the room. I looked at him, his face bright under camera lights, his smile well rehearsed. Beside him, Rachel held his hand, her eyes wavering. I knew she was trembling inside. Brandon stepped toward me, placing a hand on my shoulder. "Dad, I know you don't do much these days, but this gift, it's beyond amazing. Thank you for this incredible present." I tilted my head slightly, locking eyes with him, my tone steady as a ticking clock. "You're sure it's yours?" He froze for a beat. The crowd thought it was a joke, and a few awkward laughs echoed. I kept my thin smile soft as early wind. Then I signaled to Tessa. She stepped forward from the back row, holding a sealed folder containing a notarized copy of the certificate of ownership. She handed it directly to Darren Cho, the showroom manager in a sleek black suit. Tessa spoke clearly. "Mr. Darren, would you please confirm the legally registered owner of this vehicle?" The room fell silent. Darren frowned, opened the envelope, glanced at the document, then looked up. According to Sterling Motors records, this Tesla Model S Plaid was paid through a business account, and the official registered owner is Drummond Agritech, LLC. Owner, Caleb Drummond. The room erupted, then went dead quiet. Camera shutters stopped clicking. Brandon stood frozen, mouth open but speechless. Rachel broke into tears, and I just stood there, silent, light glinting across my eyes. I looked around, my faint smile sharp as a chisel mark on stone. I've heard their laughter for 2 weeks now, that I'm a senile old man, goaded into signing away my money. They thought I was stupid enough to gift $210,000 to my son-in-law just because of a taunt. I turned to Brandon, my voice low, but each word falling like a hammer on steel. I never said it was a gift. I signed as the founder of Drummond Agritech, the company that owns this car. Then I reached into my vest pocket and took out a small silver-wrapped box. I placed it on the shiny hood of the Tesla. "But I did bring you a gift, Brandon. A real one for a real man. Go on, open it." He looked at me suspiciously. Rachel whispered, "Brandon, open it." He untied the ribbon and lifted the lid. Inside was a die-cast Tesla Model S, scale 118, price tag $24.99. The showroom lights shimmered off its silver paint, mocking him with its tiny perfection. I spoke slowly, voice deep and clear. "That's the only thing I ever meant to give, because to me, a man only deserves what he's earned." I stepped closer, the real Tesla's glass gleaming behind him. "Do you know what I've done for you, too, Brandon? In 2021, I paid your $120,000 tax debt. I gave you a job, a home, a second chance. And today, you've taught me a new lesson, that everything I gave was still not enough." I lifted my eyes to the reporters' cameras. "So be it. From now on, if anyone wants something, they'll earn it with their own hands, because Drummond gives no more gifts. And this car, it never left my company." A reporter called out, "Sorry, sir, did you just say this vehicle belongs to your company?" Darren nodded hesitantly. "Yes, that's correct. According to the official records and verified bank documents, the payment came from Drummond Agritech's account. Ownership has never been transferred." I turned to Brandon, my voice calm yet terrifyingly steady. "You're right, Brandon. The gift really is extraordinary. Too bad it was never yours." The room was utterly still. Brandon forced a crooked smile, whispering into the microphone, "There must be some misunderstanding. I'll handle this later." But right then Tessa stepped closer, speaking softly enough for only us to hear. "This is just the beginning, Brandon." Camera flashes burst like knives. I turned away without looking back. Behind me, the host stammered through broken lines, trying to save the event. But that ceremony, meant to show off triumph, had turned into the first public trial, where justice needed no gavel, only black ink on white paper. As I stepped outside, my phone vibrated. A text from Tessa. "Bank documents filed. Phase 2 begins." I slipped the phone into my pocket and murmured to myself, "Yes, we've only just begun." 3 days after the ceremony, Fort Worth was no longer talking about the Tesla Model S Plaid. It was talking about a crime. The front page of the Texas Business Chronicle ran a bold headline: "Sterling Motors executive accused of using company funds to purchase luxury vehicle." Below it was a photo of Brandon, his face stiff, lips pressed tight, eyes looking away from the camera. Within hours, the news spread across every platform. Local stations replayed the footage of him receiving his gift in front of the crowd. A video sent anonymously to the press, likely by a field reporter. His words echoed clearly through the speakers. "Thank you, Dad, for this amazing gift. and right after came my voice. You sure it's yours? Together, the two lines formed a perfect indictment. That morning, the internal board of Sterling Drummond Group convened an emergency meeting. 5 equity members, including my former financial advisor, voted to suspend Brandon pending investigation. The Austin Ledger reported. Internal sources confirm Sterling Drummond disbursed $210,000 from a corporate account to fund a personal transaction, potentially violating the Texas Corporate Asset Management Act. By noon, cracks began to show. Brandon publicly blamed Rachel, claiming during a press interview that my wife managed the secondary accounting files and may have made an error. Rachel heard that interview from her hotel room, eyes red. That afternoon, she packed her things and took a ride back to Austin. Before leaving, she sent me a short text. I'm sorry, Dad. I didn't know he'd go this far. I read it in silence. On my desk lay the completed file that Tessa and I had assembled. Every transaction, every statement, every bank log compiled into a 72-page summary. Each page carried a hash code, a digital signature, and Tessa Morales' notarized seal. I placed the envelope on the table, sealed it, and signed across the flap. The printed label read, To Texas Corporate Fraud Unit, State Attorney's Office. Inside was the full documentation of Brandon Sterling's misuse of corporate assets. Not just the car, but also 2 prior shadow payments. One to Sterling Lifestyle Media, run by his cousin, and one to Oak Ridge Consulting, a shell company formed that June. When the courier left my gate, I watched his vehicle roll slowly down the wet street. I knew that from that moment on, the wheels of justice had begun to turn, quietly but unstoppably. 2 days later, Brandon struck back. I opened my phone to see a new headline in the Metro Herald. Caleb Drummond, 70-year-old former businessman, mentally declining, manipulated by legal aid. Below was an interview clip of Brandon speaking solemnly into the camera. He's old. His memory isn't what it used to be. I believe Tessa's taking advantage of him. They're trying to discredit me out of jealousy and misunderstanding. I smiled faintly and exhaled. I'd expected this move. When the greedy start talking about morality, it means they've run out of defenses. I set my coffee cup down and looked out the window. The late afternoon Texas light streamed across the desk, glinting off the last sealed envelope, the duplicate of the file I'd already sent. On the back, I wrote a single line by hand. No one redeems their honor through lies. In my inbox, a new message appeared from Tessa. Brandon hired a PR firm to push the senile old man's story. I've contacted Dr. Sanderson to verify your medical file. Everything's perfectly normal. Tomorrow morning, I'll submit his affidavit confirming your full mental capacity. I read it and nodded slowly. Good, Brandon. Keep talking. Because the more you speak, the deeper you bury yourself. 2 weeks after the ceremony, a pale yellow envelope was neatly placed at my doorstep, the seal of the Tarrant County Court gleaming under the light. Inside was a summons. Brandon Sterling petitions for a guardianship hearing because Caleb Drummond exhibits signs of diminished mental capacity and requires legal representation. I read that line again and again. My own name, Caleb Drummond, printed in italics, sat between cold, words that looked more like a sentence than a notice. I wasn't surprised. When the guilty can't deny their crime, they try to make the sane look insane. That evening I sat in the old woodworking office that once served as Drummond Agritech's first headquarters. The amber light from the lamp glowed against a photograph of my late wife, Marjorie, taken in 2017, her smile still as gentle as the day she left. The night she died, Rachel held me and whispered through tears, "I'll never let anyone take what you built." I had believed that promise, and now seeing Brandon's name on the court order, I understood. Some promises only live as long as courage does. I didn't call a lawyer, didn't issue a statement. I prepared only one thing, a silver USB drive labeled by hand. Drummond Evidence 1. Inside were everything I needed. ownership certificates, original bank statements, the security camera footage from the car ceremony, and the audio recording of my conversation with Rick Salazar on that rainy night. Monday morning, the Tarrant County courtroom was packed. Brandon arrived with two young attorneys in polished black suits and red ties, walking with practiced confidence. When I entered, he turned and smiled. "You came. Good. I don't want this to get ugly, but someone has to take care of your assets, Dad." I replied quietly. "You're half right. Someone has to take care of them. But that someone isn't you." The hearing began. His attorney spoke quickly, words dripping with insinuation. "Mr. Drummond, age 70, retired, recently exhibiting forgetfulness, trusting individuals of unclear intent. He has fallen under the influence of a legal aide, Ms. Tessa Morales, who is exploiting his former company for personal gain." Brandon sat behind them, smirking as if the verdict were already written. I said nothing. My hand rested on the USB in my vest pocket. Every sentence they spoke tightened the room, not from fear, but from sadness, the kind that comes when someone who once called you Dad builds a stage to strip away your mind. When the judge finally asked me to stand, I spoke simply. "Your Honor, I do not object. If they wish to test my memory, please do. I have nothing to hide. I only have one thing to submit, evidence." Brandon laughed aloud. "Evidence? You have nothing left, old man. The company, the house, your reputation, it's all gone. All you've got are delusions." I turned to him, my smile thin as a blade. "Delusions don't sign contracts, Brandon. But truth can end a lie." The judge nodded. "Mr. Drummond, you said you have evidence?" I nodded slowly, taking the silver USB from my pocket and placing it on the table. "Yes, Your Honor, and it speaks for itself." The room fell silent. The air vents hummed faintly through the walls. The judge motioned for the clerk to connect the device to the courtroom display. When the screen lit up, a video window appeared with the heading, in bold, "Transaction Log, Sterling Motors, Drummond Agritech, $210,000. The judge leaned forward. "Mr. Drummond, do you claim this proves ownership?" I rested my hand on the table, my voice calm but cutting. "No, Your Honor. It doesn't just prove ownership, it proves the truth." Then I pressed play. The courtroom screen lit up, casting a blue glow across every face. It was Tessa Morales who had secured this recording. Before the ceremony, she had arranged for an independent journalist from the Fort Worth Business Review to film the entire car handover event, under the pretense of producing corporate media coverage. The video captured everything: timestamps, audio, and the payment screen displaying funds transferred directly from Drummond Agritech's business account. Later, Tessa backed up the original file, sealed it at Morales and Kent Law Office, attached a checksum and hash code, turning it into legal, irrefutable evidence. The first image appeared, inside Sterling Motors' showroom, Brandon in a white suit, pen in hand, signing the purchase contract amid applause. His voice rang out, unmistakable. "Thank you, Dad, for this amazing gift." The next frame cut to a bank document with the First Lone Star Bank logo in the corner, clearly showing, "Payment, $210,000. Origin account, Drummond Agritech, LLC. Recipient, Sterling Motors." Below it, the verified digital seal and transaction ID glowed on screen. Brandon stiffened, his face turning pale. He looked around for an escape, but every camera lens was fixed on him. A reporter from the gallery quietly began filming. The judge gestured for Tessa to proceed. She stepped to the lectern, holding a thick binder, and opened the first page. "Your Honor, this is the certified ownership record for Drummond Agritech, LLC, notarized in the state of Texas. Clause 4.2 of the operating agreement clearly states, Caleb Drummond, owner, 51%. Brandon Sterling, appointed manager only. No equity." She looked up, her voice firm. "Using corporate funds for personal purchases constitutes misappropriation of company assets. The video, statements, and operating agreement confirmed this violation. The judge reviewed the paper, then fixed his gaze on Brandon. "Mr. Sterling, do you have any rebuttal?" Brandon's voice trembled. I was just following orders. My father-in-law told me to sign." A faint ripple of laughter moved through the room. One juror even shook his head. I remained still, hands clasped, eyes locked on him. The judge tapped the gavel 3 times, his voice resonant. "This court finds Mr. Caleb Drummond fully competent and of sound mind. Legal ownership of Drummond Agritech assets is hereby affirmed. The act of Mr. Brandon Sterling using corporate funds for a personal vehicle constitutes a statutory violation. Mr. Caleb Drummond is granted immediate right of repossession of the Tesla Model S. Plaid." A sharp silence fell like glass meeting stone. Then the courtroom doors opened. 2 court officers entered with Sterling Motors manager Darren Cho, holding the court's seizure order. Darren looked straight at Brandon, his voice flat. "The vehicle has been re-registered by court order. We're taking it now." Cameras erupted. A live reporter from the Fort Worth Gazette streamed the scene to thousands online. From the audience, a middle-aged woman quietly wept as I rose. Noon sunlight flooding through the windows, glinting off my glasses like steel. Brandon bowed his head, gripping the table, face ashen. He tried to speak, but no sound came. Tessa closed the binder, placed it before him, and said softly, "That car isn't yours anymore." Applause began from the back row, spreading through the chamber. Jurors, citizens, and even reporters stood. The sound rolled against the high ceiling like a steady heartbeat. I turned to him one last time. "Thank you for the lesson, Brandon. I just hope one day you understand. Honor isn't something you buy with another man's money." I walked toward the exit. The Texas heat swept in, carrying dust and golden light. Outside, a police car rolled forward, followed by the Sterling Motors tow truck, hauling the Tesla Model S Plaid back to the court's impound facility. As I descended the steps, a reporter called out, "Mr. Drummond, any final words?" I paused, adjusted my glasses, sunlight flashing like a blade. "Just one. You can buy a car again, but not your honor." Then I kept walking, leaving behind the brilliance of the Texas noon and the echo of applause still beating in the air. A week after the trial, the Texas Business Gazette published a 2-page editorial under the headline, "From Arrogance to Ashes, the Fall of Brandon Sterling." Beneath it was a photograph of him bowing his head, in court, hands gripping the edge of the table, the harsh white light cutting across his pale face. The first line read, "One wrong signature, one limitless greed, and a 70-year-old man proved that honor never goes out of style." The story spread across Texas. Local news stations replayed the courtroom footage under the title "Silent Justice in Fort Worth," drawing millions of views in just 3 days. In the comments, people wrote, "That man didn't need to shout. He only needed evidence. I wish my father were alive to see this. Justice doesn't need noise, only patience." Meanwhile, the Texas Secretary of State, in coordination with the TXDMV and the Texas Comptroller of Public Accounts, issued a temporary suspension of Sterling's business licenses. The board voted to remove Brandon and appointed Tessa Morales as interim financial overseer for 6 months. Brandon vanished from the media. His Arlington home was sealed by the bank. Rumor had it he'd left Texas. Rachel, however, returned to Austin. That afternoon, as I was wiping down the old lathe, in my workshop I heard footsteps behind me. Rachel stood there, her hair tied back, white shirt slightly wrinkled, eyes hollow from sleepless nights. "Dad," she said, her voice breaking, "I'm sorry. I never thought it would go this far." I set down the cloth and met her eyes. "Don't apologize to me," I said quietly. "Apologize to your own conscience, because I can forgive, but it may not." She burst into tears and wrapped her arms around me. I said nothing, only patted her shoulder gently until her breathing slowed. A few days later, Tessa arrived carrying a folder and a sealed envelope from the court. "The restitution's been processed, sir. $210,000 plus court costs. What do you want to do with it?" I stayed silent for a long moment, gazing out toward the open field where the Texas sun burned gold against the horizon. "Tessa," I said finally, "that money doesn't belong back in my pocket. It needs to return to where it came from, to work, to knowledge, to the hands that build something real." She looked at me, waiting. I smiled faintly. "Let's create a fund, a scholarship for mechanical engineering students who can't afford school. Call it the Drummond Mechanics Scholarship. If I no longer have the strength to build, then let the next generation repair what arrogance has broken." Tessa nodded, pressing her lips together to hold back emotion. "I'll get started right away, sir." She laid a proposal in front of me, the Drummond Mechanics Scholarship, a program for financially challenged mechanical engineering students administered through the Drummond Agritech Foundation. I stared at the printed title in silence. A piece of my life, all the years spent in the workshop, in factories, in sweat and oil, had transformed into an opportunity for someone else. "Is this name all right?" Tessa asked. I nodded, my voice rough. "Perfect. Because justice doesn't end in a courtroom. It begins in the human heart." She smiled and pulled out a thick certificate printed on cream paper. Beneath the typed text, she had added a handwritten line in bold black ink, "To those who fix what arrogance breaks." I read it 3 times, then framed the document in oak and hung it on the workshop wall beneath Marjorie's old photograph. Outside, the Texas sunset burned red, its reflection on the glass consuming the last traces of betrayal. As the evening light faded, I rested my hand on the wooden frame and whispered, "If anyone ever asks what justice looks like, this is its shape." 3 months later, the spring wind of Austin swept through the Barton Creek Valley, carrying the scent of damp soil and the low hum of engines from distant farms. I reopened the old workshop, once the heart of Drummond Agritech, now transformed into a small training center for young mechanics. The oak sign hanging above the door bore a new engraving, "The Drummond Workshop." Every engine deserves respect. Every morning I arrived early. The smell of oil, the clink of wrenches, the sputter of test motors, they blended like the soundtrack of my life. I taught the students how to set valves, align crankshafts, read hydraulic schematics. But more than anything, I taught them what the years had taught me. Respect what you repair because it carries the breath of the one who built it. They came from everywhere, sons of farmers, roadside mechanics, kids with calloused hands and determined eyes. When I placed my hand on their shoulders and guided them through a task, I saw a kind of pride that Brandon's generation had lost. The belief that honest work was never beneath anyone. One afternoon, as sunlight slanted through the doorway, I heard a sound outside. A man stood motionless at the threshold. Brandon. His shirt was faded, his hands rough, his hair unkempt. He stood still for a moment, then spoke quietly. "I heard you're hiring technicians. I'd like to start over." I didn't answer right away. I just looked into his eyes. There was no arrogance left, only the exhaustion of a man who had finally tasted the cost of his pride. I wiped my hands on a rag and spoke slowly, loud enough for everyone in the shop to hear. "If you work honestly, I won't ask about the past. In here, there's only work and honor." He nodded, eyes reddening. "Thank you. I don't deserve it, but I'll earn it." The shop fell silent. I handed him a new pair of gloves. He accepted them with both hands, as if reclaiming his own soul. That evening I watched him bend over under the warm yellow light, carefully fixing an old water pump. For the first time, I didn't see a betrayer. I saw a man relearning how to be one. The workshop door opened again. Rachel stepped in carrying a thick folder. She smiled faintly at me and at Brandon, then set an envelope on the table. "Debt clearance certificate," she said softly. "Signed, sealed, and recorded. Everything between the Sterling family and you, is officially settled. Oh, I looked at the paper, the light catching on the embossed lettering. Perhaps at last, the gears of justice had completed their full turn. 2 years passed. That Texas summer was brighter than any before. The fields south of Austin stretched to the horizon, glowing with the color of honey. The Drummond Mechanics Scholarship, the vocational fund I had built from the restitution money, had now grown into a network of hands-on training workshops spread across the state. Every small town had a workshop, a signboard, and a teacher standing amid the scent of oil and metal, reminding young people that honest work is the only way to keep your pride. That morning I drove the same Tesla Model S Plaid, the car that once stood at the center of the courtroom storm, now repainted a humble silver white, its doors carrying the Foundation's logo, Drummond Foundation for Honest Work. The tires rolled down the highway toward San Marcos Technical Institute, where the second annual scholarship ceremony was about to begin. I parked among rows of old pickup trucks belonging to students and instructors. The sun glinted off the car's surface, reflecting the words, "Honest Work," against the clear blue sky. Leaning lightly on my cane, I took a deep breath. The air carried the scent of oil, hot steel, and freshly cut grass, the smell of being alive and useful. On the temporary stage, rows of students in blue work uniforms sat upright, young faces filled with anticipation and quiet respect. When the host called my name, I walked up, holding my prepared speech, then folded it away. No script could say what the heart already knew. 2 years ago, a car made people misunderstand the value of real work, I said. Today, it stands there, not as a symbol of wealth, but of redemption. I paused, looking down at the front row where Brandon sat among the first-year mechanics. He did not look away. His eyes were calm, humble. I nodded slightly and continued. I didn't seek revenge. I just repaired one machine, and that machine was called justice. The courtyard erupted in applause, not loud like that day in court, but steady and warm, filled with belief. Every clap felt like it struck my heart, washing away years of silence and misjudgment. The ceremony ended as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in orange and crimson. The bronze letters on the front gate gleamed under the fading light. Drummond Foundation for Honest Work. I stood quietly, hands clasped, listening to the wind whistle through the sign, like the whisper of the past. Behind me, the students laughed while packing their tools, engines humming faintly in the distance. I walked toward the Tesla, now the Foundation's car, its silver body glowing under the sunset. Before opening the door, I murmured as if to someone unseen, "Marjorie, it's fixed now. Not the machines, the people. And I still believe justice always arrives, if you have the patience to let time hear it." I sat behind the wheel, started the motor, the electric hum rising like a quiet breath. The car rolled down the lane between the Texas maples, rustling in the warm wind, carrying the last light of the day, the light of justice, of silence, and of a heart finally at peace. Justice is not revenge. It is the quiet journey of straightening what was bent. Through patience, through honest work, and through dignity no one can buy. If you still believe honest work is something to be proud of, leave a single dot in the comments. So I'll know there are still people who believe in the kind of justice that works in silence, yet endures forever.